Adam Norris, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
All right, thanks, Adz. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. You've been out doing a bit of photography recently with the swells that have come through.
Um, it's probably been a couple of weeks. The last time I went down the road and filmed the guys, I caught up with Reuben and Job and Joss, some of the guys, a little bit down the coast from where we are, and filmed them there. I mean, it's a spot I film at a lot, to be honest. There's no guarantees, but you know what it's like. I'm not a high level surfer myself at all. I'm not. I don't even surf that regularly anymore, but as a photographer and filmer, you're trying to work out the surf forecast just like everyone else and try and sort of read between the lines. Especially with the switch to Surfline, it feels like everyone's trying to learn a new language. You know, after the demise of Magic Seaweed, just working out the little differences between the two. But yeah, so I have been filming a little bit to answer your question, and I'm heading off to Europe the beginning of December. I'm heading to like France, Spain, Portugal. So hoping to get lucky there, but we'll see.
Nice. Sounds like you're developing nicely because you've only been on the kind of the surf photography and video scene really sort of like what the last 2 or 3 years really.
Yeah, I mean, I very much like a late comer to surfing. Um, I mean, I grew up in a place called Sutton Coldfield in Birmingham, and we did have a family connection to surfing because my second cousin on my dad's side of the family was actually Steve Daniel, who was a British champion in the early '80s and competed in Europe and was pretty successful in Europe as well. And so I had no real connection to surfing as a child. Never really went in the ocean, but the only thing I remember is we used to go to Plymouth every Christmas and visit the extended family. And we had this sort of awareness of Steve as being someone a bit special in that he did this thing surfing and that he was successful at it. And to be honest, for us as kids, it was mainly things like we'd get really excited because he'd be giving us like these Ocean Pacific T-shirts and some of this surf gear and stuff, and which we loved. And occasionally we'd get copies of surf mags that he'd been that there'd be photos of him published in. I'm guessing it probably would have been Wavelength or maybe some early cars as well. Um, but yeah, so my connection to surfing really only apart from that, and I mean it's strange really looking back because we never. I was one of those children who watched Jaws at an early age, had a sort of irrational fear of the ocean. I would go in the ocean. I wasn't scared stiff of it, but I wasn't like someone who got in the sea and felt comfortable and felt this draw to the ocean. So I never really had much of a desire to explore it as a kid. But then I, so as I was growing up, though, and well, I ended up in a relationship with someone who's now just a dear friend of mine, and she bought me a subscription to this magazine called The New Yorker. And there was an article in this magazine at one point called Playing Doc's Games. It was written by this journalist called William Finnegan. And it was all about his experience as a lifelong surfer and having moved to San Francisco. And what was happening was he was slowly getting drawn into doing sort of bigger and bigger wave surfing with this big wave surfer called Doc Renneker, who's based in San Francisco as well. And that article just really like fired me up, fired my imagination. So like it's an article that's actually in two parts. So I read both parts of it, and then he ended up publishing a surf memoir, which is called Barbarian Days. And for anyone who hasn't read it, who's into the surf world, I would highly recommend it. I mean, it sort of tells the story of his life from very, very early days surfing in Hawaii to at sort of 20-ish. He goes on like a safari, goes all around the world, but you've got to bear in mind this is at a time where there's no such thing as surf forecasting. There's loads and loads of unexplored spots. And there's a sequence in the book where he and the fellow he's traveling with managed to find out. They hear rumors about this wave in this location that may be really, really exceptional. So they managed to get taken to this island by some local guys over there. And it turns out, of course, it's Tavarua, and the wave they're talking about is restaurants, and the other wave, obviously, cloud break. So he was probably one of the first guys to surf in restaurants and cloud break, and so he just talks about. And there are other experiences he goes into. He surfed J Bay a lot, surfed Kira a lot. You know, traveled around the world. So it just anyway, it really kind of fired my imagination, and I thought I want to go and try surfing. So I just drove to Woolacombe, hired a mini mal, got in the water. Don't really have any talent for it, or not super into fitness. I'm not particularly brave physically, so you know what it's like trying to learn surfing when you're in your 40s. You see what happens, and but I loved it. It's all the cliches you hear that people say about surfing. You know, the sense of well-being, the feeling of everything, just all the worries in the world lifted off your shoulders temporarily, and all that kind of thing. So I kind of fell in love with surfing, and for a couple of years, I tried pretty intently to try and learn as best I could. Of course, never occurs to me to get a surf lesson of any kind. I go to places, hire boards, and just try and copy what people are doing. And I did make some progress. I got to the point where I can sort of take off on an unbroken wave, trim down the line. That's kind of about the extent of my surfing ability. But during that time, I went on a surf trip to France, and I was staying in a little place just north of Hossegor called Vieux-Bucco. And first day, I've got this big, huge, Bic board that weighs an absolute ton. I'm walking down to the beach, and there are what look like sort of probably 3-foot waves, nothing that heavy. But of course, people who've been to France know that it's a different proposition, you know, that region of France in terms of the power. And I get properly worked in my first attempts, and I think, well, what am I going to do? I've come here to surf, and these waves, I'm clearly not sort of equipped. So I drove down to Hossegor, and at the time, I got lucky. It just so happened to be that the Quick Pro France was on, and there are crowds on the beach. John Florence and Mick Fanning are in the water. I have no idea who they are at the time, because you know this is all new to me. But I remember that was the first time I had a camera with me, and I tried to take some photos, and it kind of sparked. I really like this. I've always kind of picked up cameras now and again through the course of my life. My dad worked for a photographic company, so there were cameras lying around at home. And I had partners who were really into photography, and I would borrow their camera and go and do some shots. But that was the first experience. And then being in Hossegor, anyone who's been to Hossegor knows how dramatic and photogenic the conditions can get. And so that was like the first step into me thinking, I want to do more of this.
What were you doing while you were doing this? I mean, what sort of what occupation were you in at the time?
Sorry, yeah, I retrained, and I'm a nurse. So I trained in the Midlands, and then when my partner and I at the time, we were both training. When we finished, we moved to the south coast. We moved to like Worthing sort of area. And my partner and I, we split up, and so that kind of was another element. So I was kind of like, I've got this free time. When you're working as a nurse, a lot of the time you're working 3 or 4 days a week. So you've got, relatively speaking, quite a bit of free time. I don't have children. So I'm pretty much a free agent in lots of respects. So I was lucky. I'm not in the position where I can disappear for 2 or 3 days to Devon or Cornwall at that point in time, and it's no stress for anyone. So that was how it started. Those first 2 years, I was just driving back and forth a lot of the time to Woolacombe, but then starting to go down the coast a bit as well, Newquay area. And eventually I bit the bullet, decided I want to move, and applied for jobs. I applied for a job here and applied for a job down in Cornwall, interviewed here and decided to come here. And so I worked on the respiratory ward sort of permanently for 4 years or so at North Devon District Hospital. And then I'm now what's called a bank nurse, where um, the NHS trusts have like a bank of staff who can book shifts. They list the shifts that need covering, and we book the shifts. So it's not an agency nurse. You're working for the NHS, but it gives you a lot of flexibility and and a lot of control over when you're going to work. So if a really good swell's popping up, early next week, I can switch my shifts around easily and go and film or do photography. So I'm sort of lucky in that respect.
Sounds like it all kind of just it's kind of fallen into place for you, really, trying to follow one passion, but have a job that can pay the bills, and
Yeah.
you have a career path as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's as I've been going along, I think like a lot of people are aware that some years ago there was quite a lot of money in the surf industry, and then kind of the bottom fell out of it. And now there's not a huge amount of money available. I think there are if you I consider myself really to be in the early stages of my photography and filming. Sort of, I'm still very much learning. But having said that, along the way, I've started earning little bits of money here and there from various companies, and that all helps because camera gear can cost a fortune. So it's just at the moment it's kind of just sort of paying some of the bills for covering some of my costs, but potentially I'm going to see where it goes, and because the other thing is having a passion and a hobby. Sometimes if you decide to commit full time to it and do it professionally, then you introduce a lot of stress, expectations, and you can lose that kind of pure sort of joy of it, can't you? I'm sure you know that yourself. Yeah. So it's I don't know if I would want to do it full time professionally, because then that does limit you in terms of the freedom. You can go in any direction if you're doing it for yourself, whereas if you're doing it professionally, you can start to feel these elements. But I've been grateful to work with it. Any of the brands I've managed to do little bits and pieces for, I'm certainly very grateful. It's been a good experience, so I'm not complaining. But there are benefits also to doing it just as a passion and a hobby, I think.
When did you start kind of going, right, this is something that I want to explore a little bit more? Because like you say, camera gear is kind of like an ever evolving thing, isn't it? I would compare it to kind of like the wind industry, where you've got windsurfing and kite surfing. Each year a new model comes out, and each model or like gaming PlayStations and stuff like that, when the new one comes out, it costs more, but it's only got a couple of little new gadgets or some better pixels on it. So when did you kind of feel like, right, this is something that I'm going to pursue? And what were kind of like the starter cameras and gear that you bought?
Well, I moved here in 2019, and I bought myself. That was when I bought a DSLR, and I bought a big telephoto lens. And at the time it was a Nikon D7200, which is it's a digital SLR camera, so you can change lenses on it. It has a mirror that and for a while I shot with what I did was I shot with that probably for a year or so, and then as I was out shooting maybe 3 times a week for quite long. It was a huge part of my life. So after a while, I justified to myself, right, let's get a slightly better camera. So I bought an old full frame Nikon digital SLR, and progressed along with that for a while. And the trouble with camera gear, it's very much like surfers with boards, that you have a little bit of success with a camera and you see the potential or whatever, but then you think, well, if I had this piece of equipment, it's going to allow me to achieve this, and therefore I'm going to get this piece of equipment and it's going to, and there's a certain amount of truth in that. But of course, there's much more truth in the fact that, you know, you need to learn how to use the piece of equipment that you've actually got to its full extent. But I would never lecture people on it. It's just that, like, there's a name for it. It's probably in other fields as well. But in photography, they talk about gear acquisition syndrome, or GAS, where you buy a camera and then you're on YouTube and you're watching these reviews, and then you need another camera, and then you need another camera. Before you know it, you're spending money you don't have on all this equipment. The one thing I would say that argued in my favor during that time was that I was shooting all the time. So it was not like I was buying this stuff and it's just sitting on a shelf and I'm not using it. So, but a turning point for me came when I went, after that first experience at Hossegor, I started going back there. I think I went 3 years in a row. The second time I went, I was staying in this little hostel that some people probably know about. Joe and Joe Hossegor is a nice little hostel there. And there was this crew of, like, it was 5 young Western Australian surfers. And what they'd done is they bought themselves like a 1990 Ford Fiesta, and the 5 of them with, like, God knows how many boards were squeezed in this Fiesta, and they were driving around. And I was sitting in this hostel one evening, I was editing some photos, and one of them said to me, I'm going to surf La Gravière tomorrow on a longboard. Do you want to come and photograph it? And I was like, yeah, definitely, definitely. And he said to me, do you do video? And at that point, I said, no, I don't, because for people who are into photography or interested in photography who are listening to this, DSLRs, there's a new generation of digital cameras called mirrorless cameras, which tend to be much, much better for video. And the reason why that is because a lot of people, when they're first doing video, are shooting autofocus, and mirrorless cameras just have much, much better autofocus. So that was the first time I thought, I'm missing a bit of an opportunity here, because now the reality is, if I had more skill, I probably could have found a way to film him, but it would have been so much easier if I had a mirrorless camera. But I went and took some photos of him. It was an experience. It turned out that he was a competitive, he was on the World Longboard Tour. His name is Anthony Spencer. And because I was just thinking, how on earth is he going to surf that wave on a longboard? How's he going to, it's like a 9.6 or whatever it was, big Firewire Timbertech thing. And I'm thinking, and he put on a show, but that was the first time it really clicked for me. I want to be able to do video as well, if I can. And so I think maybe the second trip, when I came back from Hossegor, I came back to the UK, and it's no slight on the waves near where I live, but sometimes they can be a bit difficult to film, a bit difficult to get the best out of. And I was looking, I suppose, for some more dramatic conditions. So I started traveling around the UK looking for sort of more dramatic, like aesthetically more dramatic looking waves.
Is that to do with, like, the angle of you're taking the shot from, or it's difficult to get down to?
It is, like, I don't get me wrong, like, without naming the spot, although I suppose it doesn't matter, we're both locals here, but the local shortboarding break here, I do enjoy filming at, and I think I've been filming a bit with Will Baily recently there, and there are ways to get really, really nice footage, really nice angles. It's just a question of, beach breaks can be harder to film than points or reef breaks, for the obvious reason that they're shifting around so much, and very often they're busy, and in the bigger conditions, you've got this constant battle of trying to track the surfer you're there to film. And so there's just some now, don't get me wrong, you need to be able to film at beach breaks, and I do, but it is more of a challenge than filming at a point break or filming at a reef break, for that obvious reason. But I started sort of, I think it's also like a natural thing that when you get into surfing, whether you're surfing yourself or whether you're sort of following the sport, you do want to explore a bit. So I went up to the north coast of Scotland, went down to the south coast of England, and then I started looking for these different types of waves. I suppose a big part of it was that I was looking for probably for reef breaks, if I'm honest.
Were you getting guided by surfers? So did you know, like, you mentioned Will being one of really good surfers from North Devon. Did they kind of drop a few names into you and give you some pin drops of where to go, or were you just literally looking at like Google Maps and going, yeah, there might be people here?
I think, well, it's funny. The first time I took photos of Reuben Ash and Joss Ash, his brother, I literally, I'd come back from that trip and I just drove down the coast and I was just looking for, and that was genuinely just, I'm just going to explore and see what I find. And I happened to drive down this lane and I happen upon this spot and I see these two surfers out. And I think it's funny because I think at that time, although I was watching a fair bit of surfing, I don't think I could really distinguish between like competent surfing and like elite surfing. I think I see it sometimes when I talk to like if I'm showing a friend of mine who's got zero interest in surfing, if I show them a clip of surfing, I don't feel like they distinguish between what is someone just kind of trimming down a line capably or what is someone doing, really throwing out the tail or whatever. So the first time I saw them, I don't know if I recognized how special those two guys were, but I took some shots that day and I just made a mental note. I'm going to remember how to get to this place and I'm going to come back. So I had some experiences like that. And then I think it was also a combination of just Googling and looking at Storm Rider Guide and things like that. And to be honest, this is where, like, don't get me wrong, I absolutely respect the need to be discreet and to not be sort of publicizing the names and locations of places left, right, and center. But the counter argument to that is that if you've got a strong interest, you're going to find you can often find these waves, can't you? And having said that, I'm not really filming it. I'm filming at what you call semi-secret spots. They're not really secret spots. People know them. But at the same time, I'm not going to be putting the names of the places around because obviously I understand the feelings of the local surfers there.
You don't want to get fucking stoned. That's what you mean.
Well, someone told me the other day that there was a bit of an issue at one of the spots I film at, but I don't know if that's true or not. He just said he'd read something about some aggravation there. But I mean, when I first started going, after I spotted like Reuben and Joss, and I started going back there regularly, I did actually. I literally went up to a few. There'd be groups of locals preparing to go in, and I'd go and introduce myself, saying, "Listen, I've been coming here filming. I just want to make sure you guys feel comfortable with it. I'm not stepping on any toes." And to be honest, they were kind of like, "People have been bloody filming Reuben here for years. It doesn't matter." And they were all like relaxed about it. And for the most part, people are. I mean, I have had someone come up to me at another break, and in the opposite direction and sort of give me a bit of a lecture and sort of say, we destroy what we love and all this kind of stuff. And listen, I understand that. I do respect the fact that you need to be discreet and you shouldn't be just encouraging everyone to just mob a place. But I also think that the bottom line is, it's public land. You've got to be. It's about your attitude for me. If you're respectful and you approach some place respectfully, and you check in with, and also, and if you've got some self-awareness about, is this a place I actually should be surfing? Am I likely to just get in the way here, or am I actually able to surf this wave? But surfing fundamentally there's a bit of like the freedom impulse in it, isn't there, where sort of don't tell me what to do. So I understand it's a complicated situation, isn't it?
I think society has moved a little bit, especially with the focus on surfing and the explosion of, in the last sort of like 5 years of people being in the water. And it's a difficult one. And I'm super guilty of it. Like, I love watching your edits and other edits that are out there. and I love what you do, but most of the time I'm like that. Right, what does that rocky outcrop? Where's that? Like, where's that? I'm trying to think. I was here that day. I didn't think that was going to be pumping like that, and then like I started getting really angry with myself because I haven't been somewhere that you've been filming, and yeah, but
Yeah.
that's the other thing I was going to kind of ask you is that, are you, when you taking your shots, are you consciously making sure that you don't put like certain landmarks in it, or is it just the fact that the focus of the shot has to be a certain way, otherwise you're not going to get the image and the video that you want of those certain people? And have you got that kind of back thought subconsciously that you don't want every man and his dog to know where it is as well?
Yeah, you definitely. I definitely. Um, I mean, there are some places that are so I like that I feel like almost so well known in the surf community that, like, there's a place on the south coast where I did an edit a couple of years ago, and um, there are little there are sort of little parts of the landscape there that are so kind of iconic to that place that it's hard to disguise. But yes, definitely. When I first was filming, and still to an extent now, I will try to avoid revealing something that's really obvious. Like, I don't want to do these like driving down shots to where I'm going sometimes, because I think, well, there's a chance that that might help someone find their way there. But having said that, I've also gone the other side, and there have been times when I've put shots in edits which probably do help people clearly identify um, the spot. But for the most part, I found that it's certainly the place where I've shot the most. I seem to, if anything, I've seemed to feel as though I've slowly, because I've been shooting there for what, 2.5 years regularly. So every time when there's a good swell, not everyone, but I try and be there for a lot of the good swells. So I've started to get to know more of the locals and become friends with some of the locals, and so I feel as though they would definitely let me know if I was uh, upsetting them in some way, or but to be honest, I think you do have to be careful, and sometimes it's frustrating because you think there'll be a shot and you think, I really want to. It's like a perfect scene setting shot, or it's a perfect like lineup sort of style shot, and you think, I'd love to use that, but I'm not going to, because potentially it might upset someone. Um, but having said that, I also, some of it is also just like a personal choice. Like, there's a surf filmmaker called Wade Carroll who he's um, he did the recent Quicksilver film Repeater. But I one of my favorite surf edits is called Rock, and it's a film he did with Mikey Wright in Hawaii. And what really got me in that edit was these really tight shots of surfers. So, the frame might be empty initially, just with the lip of a wave breaking, and then Mikey enters the frame, and you're getting all of this feeling of being right in there amongst it without actually being in the water with the water house, and you're still getting some of that sense of, you can really see the minutiae of what he's doing and how he's holding the rail or whatever he's doing. So I do quite like shooting surfers close up. So sometimes it's considerations like that. You're just thinking, I want to try and get the viewer feeling like they're really there with the surfer. But I mean, yeah, the local sensibilities thing, I do think it's important, but I have kind of uh, uh, not mixed feelings about it, because I absolutely respect the locals. But then I'm also aware you get toxic elements of any community, don't you? You get any community, you can have people who are using something to sort of justify behaving badly. So I just try and be respectful, take that approach, and just be respectful and listen to what people are saying. And if it seems very reasonable, then I'm not going to argue with it, and just respect what they say.
Well, since
But I have,
you've been filming, like the Reuben Ash and some of the the pros, sort of like Cornwall, North Devon, UK surfers. Do you ever get any kind of little phone calls from them saying, "Look, we're going to be here. You know, do you fancy coming down, taking some shots?" Because I know from your the website side of things, that I've seen from you, that you do kind of bespoke photo shooting for a price. But on the flip side of that, it's good to kind of do you get those phone calls from them to say, like, do you want to come down and do some shooting?
Well, to be honest, at first it kind of worried me because the first session I had shooting at that wave, I went down, was shooting video I'm talking about. I went down and I got really lucky because there was like Reuben and Joss were in, Miles Lee Hargreaves was in, Liam Turner was there before he'd gone away. I think possibly Job Harris was in, Barnaby Cox was in for a short period of time. So, and at that point, I didn't know any of them. I'd never spoken to any of them, and I'm filming them, and I create this little film, and I put it up on YouTube, and there were, and I did that a couple of times without having ever really spoken to any of them, but I did message them and say, "Listen, do you feel comfortable with this? Is this all right?" Because I wanted to kind of, because in some senses, I felt that time these guys are, they've got this, they're delivering raw talent and surfing at a level that is hard to find in the UK. So I thought, they're clearly bringing this big thing to the table, and I'm just there pointing a camera at them and then deciding to do whatever I want with it. And so I was kind of conscious that I wanted to try and check in with them. And initially, I don't think they got back to me. And then I would I would meet a couple of people who knew them, and they were kind of, oh, I wouldn't worry about it. They're really relaxed, chilled out. Don't worry about it. And then over time, I started to get to know Reuben a little bit, a few brief words here and then, and and we would chat more, and Joss and Miles, and so over time, I wouldn't say we're not sort of close friends or anything like that, but it's a friendly relationship we're in. And occasionally now they will. I always kind of drop them lines saying, if you're heading out and you want someone to shoot, just let me know. And I do sometimes get that heads up these days. Quite often, I might have already spotted the swell on the horizon, so I'll already be kind of thinking that I know where they're going to be, and I'll certainly turn up their days thinking I think it's pretty likely they're going to be here, and what do you know, there they are. So, but I've developed relationships with them a bit over time, and very really nice guys. They helped me out. The last time I was filming there, I went down. I took Malachi Hagley. I imagine you know Malachi, right? And I was filming, and I was trying to do like three things at once. I was trying to take stills. I was trying to film, and I was trying to avoid this tide that was coming in. And I through some sequence of events, I must have ended up putting my car keys on the floor, and I don't know how, forgetting about them. And you know what happened next? The high tide claimed the keys. So I was mostly worried about Malachi, because I'd given Malachi a lift, and we get back to my car, haven't got the keys. He's there in his wetsuit, and what we're going to do? I'm ringing, trying to get through, and there's barely any network. And Reuben, well, Joss and Reuben just said, just come up 2 hours, and they were very helpful to us. Just looked after us, looked after Malachi. I was lucky I got a locksmith to sort it out there and then, and we went on our way. But yeah, so I've got to know them a little bit. Lovely guys. What stands out to me, I think, is just this pure, and I've noticed it with like Barnaby Cox or with Will. Like Barnaby, I shot Barnaby all through the winter a couple of years ago, and in the end, the idea was that I was going to do like a surf edit about him. But to be frank, at that stage, and even at this stage still, you could talk about people being like either filmmakers or videographers, and I'm kind of at the point where I'm like a videographer trying to learn about filmmaking, if you see what I mean, trying to actually, and there are guys who I would call probably filmmakers now, a few of them in Cornwall, you know, like Rob Blackett or Seth Hughes. These guys they're filmmakers already. So long story short, I didn't do that edit of Barnaby. He got another editor in to do it. Rob Blackett did that one actually, and it was a great film. They used some of my clips and stuff, but I've forgotten what I was going to say now. What were we talking about? But Barnaby, what was I?
Barnaby, and
I've
then you
forgotten
were
the
going
initial.
on about making the surf edits and the surf films, and
Yeah,
being a surf editor or filmographer.
yeah, and we were talking about getting to know them, weren't we? But yeah, so like you know, I've certainly got to know some of these guys. I mean, sometimes it can be difficult because I'm not out. Although I've got a water housing and I used to get in the water and shoot stills quite a bit. In recent times, I've kind of lost my nerve a little bit in the water. I had a couple of experiences where I got properly freaked out, and so I'm in the process of trying to almost like rehabilitate myself, get in the water, re-expose myself to various conditions, train my brain to calm down. You know what I mean? So, but there is a separation for someone like me. You know, I'm getting close to 50, and you got like Barnaby who's like 22 or whatever, and so there's different. Sometimes it's hard to actually form that kind of relationship where someone feels relaxed with you if you're walking around with the camera. So that's one of the challenges I've had in terms of like trying to make these edits. Like I don't want to be acting like I'm their best friend and that I've known them forever when I haven't, and I don't want to act like I know all of the intricacies of what it's like to be surfing those waves. But at the same time, it does hold me back a bit sometimes not being able to kind of. I think if I was a 27-year-old guy out there trying to surf the same waves with them, it might help break down that barrier a little bit. But you know, I'm happy with what I'm doing, and I one of the things I've realized is you can't. I think it's very important to be inspired by people, and it's very important to try and be objective about where you are in terms of your skill level. But at the same time, it's also important to remember that people who achieve incredible things in any field, they started as with no skills, and what happened is they just had a curiosity and dedication and time, and then they learned those skills over time.
I think one of the things that you're talking
Like in the
about there
fields that you,
is you know, you think of some of like the real big, you know, filmmakers like your Bruce Browns, your Taylor Steeles, your Jack Johnsons, uh,
yeah,
you know, the gays that the guys, that'd be weird, wouldn't it? They're not gays, the guys that would
yeah,
that have kind of made landmark films like back in the early 80s and the late 90s. And, you know,
yeah,
Taylor Steele's been doing it since Kelly Slater was like, you know, super young. So
yeah,
those guys have done exactly the same as you, really, but with the equipment was never as high tech as what it is now. So there's that element of, like you're saying, you've only been doing it, you know, 2 or 3 years, and to get to the level now, I think your edits are a little bit different to the ones that get put out. I think it from a personal opinion, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, is because you make it uh, like your framework and whatever sort of like lighting you put into it, whether it's the filters or whatever, just makes it look a little bit more unique. And it's really difficult sometimes to try and make British waves look appetizing and appealing. So when you're
yeah,
shooting them and it's like fucking 5 degrees outside, it's freezing, you're wearing 6 mils of neoprene, but you
yeah,
make it like look appealing that people want to go and do it. And
yeah,
I think there are very few edits out there, and people that are doing things like what you are that kind of make it feel a little bit of like wholesome rawness, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. I think, I mean, it's interesting when you said invited me to come and talk on the podcast. I was thinking about like one of the things that I suppose I'd probably like to talk about is the the short films that I've seen that have kind of really sort of inspired me, that I look at and think like where I'd like to get to. And for me, it's probably like Kai Neville, the best surf film in some respects that, or my favorite is probably, it's a film called The Quieter You Are, the More You Can Hear. And it's quite an iconic film with Craig Anderson, and film is 20 minutes long, filmed in multiple locations. It's got just this incredible free surfing mixed in with Kai Neville's sort of artistic, sort of abstract stuff in between. And it's kind of difficult, even for someone who's highly motivated to watch surf content, someone like me who loves it. It's very difficult actually to make surf content really engaging. But I'm becoming more. I'm realizing actually as you go along, when you're doing this, you look at the YouTubes, because I've got a YouTube channel, that's kind of where I publish them, and you look at these analytics and it says, oh, people switch off after 1 minute 15 seconds or 1 minute 30 seconds, and you realize what you are for most people is there's just a glimpse, and it's so tempting to start trying to edit to avoid that happening. And you're thinking, well, I'll front load the edit with all this really dramatic, interesting stuff, see if I can hold on to people. And then already you're starting to lose. You're then really allowing whatever this tendency is to kind of influence the decisions you're making when you're making the edit. But the priority for me when I'm filming probably is, if I'm honest, I want to try and find like the best surfers I can find, ideally in really good, solid conditions. Like for me, there's nothing better than watching, like my favorite conditions are probably like 8 to 12 feet, huge walls, and watching someone doing these huge rail turns, probably even more so than barrels. I know barrels are this sort of absolute mecca for many surfers, but for me, if there was one thing that I'd love to be able to do on a wave, it would just be able to do a huge, big rail turn on sort of a 10-foot wave, and so I'm generally focused on like, let's find surfers who can do that, and let's ideally try and find them in the best conditions possible, and then kind of build around it. And I mean, a lot of it starts with music. Like there's an edit of there's this Australian surfer who's just qualified for the CT next year called Jacob Wilcox. And I remember I was rewatching heats from like the Margaret River events when John went absolutely crazy, like 2016 and 17, I think it was. And Jacob Wilcox was in an early heat against him, and it's like 12-foot gigantic. And there's this young kid who just looks really comfortable in heavy conditions. And so I've kind of followed Jacob Wilcox since then, and he released this film called By Default, and it's like 15 minutes long, and about 8 minutes into it, there's the start of this one session, and I feel like it's almost like the best display of just really high performance surfing, but then it morphs into like this person who's really, really comfortable in these gigantic Western Australian waves. And so I suppose that's what I'm trying to aim for. It's not, doesn't have to be gigantic waves, but just those moments when everyone in the water feels like something special's happening. You know, like I'm sure you've had that experience where you're in the water and you thought the forecast looked pretty good, and then all of a sudden you get this unexpected surprise of, wow, the waves are just really special today, you know, and you get people whooping and hollering and just feeling like, yeah, this is, you know, I mean, I remember one of the last time I went to Scotland, I went to probably the most famous wave up there, and I had to come back to Birmingham that evening because I had to go to an appointment with my mum. It was something I just could not get out of. I had to take her to this thing. And but the forecast was saying it's going to be like 8 to 12 feet by like 11 o'clock. And I get there in the morning, and at that time it's like 4 foot, and then steadily 6 foot, 8 foot. And then eventually like these gigantic waves are coming through at this break. And people are pulling up in a vans, jumping out, desperately racing to get wetsuits on, racing to get out. There's whoops, hollers, and things like that. You know, it's experiences like that really that probably the things that are most motivating for me. Finding these special moments where the conditions are just really, really nice, and then ideally finding some surfers who can make the most of them.
You can
You
never
know,
predict any of that sort of thing, though. It's kind of,
no,
it's like
no,
Mystic Meg's, little orb of destiny.
yeah,
And I think the forecasting websites kind of don't help. Like I've recently, since Magic Seaweed transferred over to Surfline, I've been to a few places where I said it was going to be okay. And look, when I check forecasts now, I've got 5 different weather forecasting apps, and I just take a generic medium out of it
yeah,
to kind of see where it is.
yeah,
And generally, it's going to be swell period. It's going to be, the swell direction, and potentially like the height and the period as well. And
yeah,
just take an estimation from that. Really, it's kind of like going all the way back to when you used to get the newspapers with the isobars in the back of the paper where it told you the weather. You just kind of like guessing, and then you go, right, okay, well, which way the wind's going to go, which spot's going to be the best place.
yeah,
And then 9 times out of 10, you'll go there, and that 1% of the time will be absolutely pumping. You go, yes, I've scored. But then, sometimes I've been in the water and you go, it's a bit funky. Or,
yeah,
you come back and someone's
yeah,
actually scored. They've scored that 1%, and they've been to another spot that you were going to go to, but you decided not to. And you're like, shit, I wish I'd gone there now. And I'm just going back to kind of
yeah,
what you were saying about 5 minutes ago. So there was a movie that was there's 2 iconic films for me when I was younger. One was called What Now. Again, I think it was one of the really early Tyler Steeler films, which had like Machado. It had all those guys in, Slater,
yeah,
Kalani Robb, and all them guys. And the soundtrack that kind of went with it was what made it. So I was really into sort of like indie grunge, like fast skater rock. You could call it these days. But then
yeah,
this was sort of like the mid 90s. I think it came out in like 95. VHS I had of it. Yeah, so that's how old it is. And then in the early 80s, there was a film called The Elusive, and I've got the guy's name here. I think the director of it was called Angus Dunlop, and it was a 55-minute film, and it was just kind of really raw footage of
yeah,
surfers from all around the country. And again, the thing that kind of made it is, I mean, we haven't even talked about putting soundtrack into a
yeah,
film yet, but it very much sets the premise of the film. You know,
yeah,
and one of the other like more recent ones, well, I say more recent, sort of like 2008, 2009 films was the Bruce movie, and it just had like these iconic songs in it that made it. Now take all of that out. It's like a horror movie, right? You take all of the incy wincy screaming and stuff, and it's just some people running around going, bah! And it's not particularly scary. It's the setting of it all, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
um, and that's one of the other things kind of with the films that you put out. And it must take like, because I've done some editing before, and especially like with the podcast, and I've got a few other bits and pieces, like 3 different businesses that I have social media platforms for it, and you have to choose like the music that goes out with like the posts or the videos that you've made. And I would call I'm a very amateur the videographer, like it's like most amoeba form. But just to try and find music to go in equally takes as long as creating the content for it, just because you're trying to find the same ambience. And there's so much out there now that you can kind of put into it. It can be really difficult to do.
yeah, yeah. Music kind of, to be honest, music is always the starting point for the edits. And sometimes I can't even, I might have gone and filmed and got like a load of really exciting clips, and I'll think I really want to try and put something together, but if I just can't find a piece of music and like the last edit I did, I was consciously like, because I've been picking this sort of moody, or some people might refer to it as sort of darker sort of music at times. And I was thinking, I want to put something in that's kind of more raucous and like a celebration. And I heard that, I don't know if you ever listen to the band Black Grape, but there's this song called Kelly's Heroes, and it's kind of like really sort of anthemic party, here we go, like raucous energy. And I had it in my mind, I definitely want to edit the next edit, I want to use that. And then you put the music in and you're editing it, and it just doesn't feel right, just doesn't work. Now I love that piece of music, but it just did not work, and I'll maybe try again. And so the music is kind of like in some ways the music is the most crucial part of it. That's not fair. No, it's not the most crucial part of it, but without it, I just can't get anywhere with it. And so you're absolutely right. And if I think about like that Jacob Wilcox edit that I mentioned, so like Jacob Wilcox has been on the QS and then the Challenger series for years, and he's someone who's been kind of like flagged as this guy absolutely charges, he really deserves to be on the CT. And the sequence of that edit I mentioned, the song on it is New York Excuse, and like the refrain in the chorus is just this woman singing, is it good enough, is it good enough? And he's there getting kind of like, he's in these like 12-foot pits in Western Australia, and it's just this refrain, is it good enough, is it good enough, and so like sometimes it just leap out at you. And I mean, certainly John's film A View from a Blue Moon, that the pipeline section in that, the first piece of music, and the way the sound design is done, like as he's just cycling along the path sort of, and then slowly walking out, like I don't know if you're going to get like a better depiction of pipeline. So and you're right, it's the music, and in a way it's dishonest, because it's kind of like that isn't really what was happening. That's not the natural sounds of the environment, but it's just all of that inspiration sort of energy that it delivers, which is,
I'll tell you, there was
that,
I think last year there was a reel that came out, John put out. No, it must have been 2 years ago, maybe longer than that. And I'm really into kind of like Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, like old school, but sounds amazing still now. Like,
absolutely.
Loads of lead guitar, loads of riffs, some really good drumming. The singing is like amazing. And there's a band called Greta Van Fleet. You heard them? And
I've heard them, absolutely, they're delivering the Led Zeppelin vibes, aren't they? 100%.
Immense. There's loads of YouTube videos out about like how the lead singer is like he equated to Robert Plant, and people kind of think, anyway, I'm digressing here massively. Anyway, John puts out this reel, and I never heard of Greta Van Fleet before, and it's just him taking off from a wave at back door, and I watched this thing like 20 or 30 times. Now the wave is amazing anyway, but sometimes when you watch pipe, it can be quite repetitive, because it's like this critical wave people will take it, like you're almost like desensitized to how like dangerous the shit that they're doing is. But this song comes on, and John takes off on this wave. It's like an air drop into like the bottom third, and he tucks in, and then he pulls out, and it's got the Safari song playing from Greta Van Fleet. And I'm like, this is immense. And I watch it 20 or 30 times. And then if you go back and you just take out the music of it, I'd have probably watched it maybe like once and just scrolled past it, like you're saying. And that's kind of like the era we're in, right? You need to find something that's captivating, that people can kind of get their grips into. And it's almost like these days, I remember like surf movies like used to be an hour and a half long. You used to have all these clips that are put together and they're banged in. Now you've got like, I think the longest ones really are like 30 minutes. There's no real like hour-long surf movies anymore, because people's attention spans are so kind of have been taken away by social media. Everybody wants this short, sharp burst or something. Like they want that endorphin rush going, yeah, that was amazing. But then they don't want to go, fucking hell, is this over yet? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
it's like taking my son out. Like, you know, he goes and plays on the park for about 5 minutes. You're like, can we go home? And like, but we're just
yeah.
like, you know,
Just got here. Yeah,
we just put
yeah,
all this effort in to do this, right? Um, which I don't know is a good thing or a bad thing. You then having to, I guess, as a videographer, you're having to consciously find the best bits that you've got and whack them all in and find the best music and what's the most captivating for people. But then also the harder thing for it then is also not doing the same thing over and over again and finding different angles, because then it becomes repetitive and people are like, yeah, we've seen this.
yeah. I think overall it probably is a bad thing in the sense that um it's really nice to have something that's got a bit of room to breathe, but then I mean, don't get me wrong, in some ways it's good because it forces you, the fact that it's so difficult to get any kind of real engagement a lot of the time with content, the fact, and don't get me wrong, I've got some engagement, but you you know, cracking the code of social media, there's people who are dedicated to it full time, and I don't really want to spend my time doing that. But at the same time, it is, I know, and I do think, but I do think it's a shame that you can't get someone to sort of say, right, I'm going to give, here's 10 minutes, and there are going to be parts of it that aren't in that first, you know, your first instinct might be to turn off, but let's just see where this goes, you know, because I do like that experience where you just don't quite know where something's going to go as a viewer, but at the same time, you know, that's just reality. You just, I suppose, you just have to face up to the fact that people are consuming content in this way, and but I suppose you can sort of decide to pick and think, well, I'm going to make this a challenge that I'm going to try, and so I'm going to try and let's see if I can produce a real, let's say 20 seconds where someone's not going to switch off. They're going to stay hooked into it. And I've seen people do that. And sometimes it's about the conditions, as you say. Sometimes it's about maybe an aspect of the photography, just that the photography is so beautiful, the light's perfect, the focus is absolutely pin shot, everything's just right. So I mean, you can interpret it in a way that will sort of drive you forward and think, well, I want to try and improve what I'm trying to do and see if I can just use it as like a motivating thing. But it can be, I think it is a shame we have, and even me, like some of Kai Neville's films, like I watched another of Kai Neville's films with Craig Anderson, and even me, I'm there feeling that impatience, saying, move to the next thing, deliver this, do that. But I think I don't, I want to try and sort of avoid falling into that trap a bit too much. But having said that, I don't try. So far, I've only tried to make edits up to 5 minutes long. You know, but I think if I would like to try and make a longer project at some point. But I think what you said about music is so true. That and this is where the kind of unknown aspect of it comes along. You kind of need something that, like a spark, that starts something and then it starts rolling. So yeah, we'll see. You know, and I mean the other thing that I'd like to do a bit more of is like I was filming at another wave that I'm sure you've been to, and there is a local guy surfing there, James Bunny. I don't know if you know James. He's a regular surfer in this area, and James is a very, very capable surfer. I wouldn't say he's not like a competing in the UK. He's not like a semi-professional surfer, but he's very capable. But I was filming him at this break, and I got a couple of clips of him. And what was so inspiring about the way he was surfing was that he was really trying to push. What he was trying to do essentially was a down carve without like a grabbing the rail. He was trying to do like this Mikey Wright thing where, you know, you put your weight back, really push that inside rail in and pull down. And he got it. And he said, and I filmed him and I said it just looked beautiful. And he said, I've been trying to do that over and over again and struggling. But I do find surfers who are really consciously trying to to develop their surfing kind of inspiring as well. So I would like to try and get into maybe filming surfers who are trying to do that a bit as well, because I think filming your surfing is probably, don't get me wrong, I think most people, I've had friends who, I mean, this is the danger actually, that when you're filming surfing a lot of the time and you don't surf yourself, you start to feel as though you could give people real insights to their surfing because you're there with the camera. And so I don't know if you listen to the Stab podcast, but Stab have this thing where they do like the surf sins. And I was nearly going to ring in and sort of say like my sin is that I feel like I'm starting to judge people surfing and feel as though I could give them advice when I can barely stand up myself on a surfboard.
Well, some of the best coaches in the world can't do the things that they tell other people to do. You mean you look at some of the swimming coaches you see at swimming pools, they look like bowling balls, and they're telling these kids how to like be Olympic level swimmers. It's kind of contradictory in my opinion, but you know, they're doing the job, right?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I kind of feel like the one thing that jumps out, maybe you could tell me this. I mean, you've surfed a lot through the course of your life, right? You've surfed a great deal. You're still surfing a lot now. And I have this kind of theory that part of what holds, this is my theory. And so part of my theory is that what holds some surfers back is the fact that almost to surf really freely, you have to be quite uninhibited. You have to be quite like, you have to be willing to maybe almost think of it as dancing, and that you're going to move your body in ways that feel slightly exaggerated at first because you're trying to achieve a particular result. So part of me was that like, part of me has this theory that it's all about relaxation and being uninhibited. And if you can be uninhibited, and if you're willing to make a fool of yourself by really pushing and trying to move your body so that someone might come along and say, I saw what you were trying to do, trying to look like Mick Fanning, I almost feel like there might be a phase in surfers development where they have to really exaggerate the positioning of their body in order to try and get the board to move in the way they need it to move. So part of me thinks maybe surfers are held back a little bit by just being a bit inhibited and just by British kind of piss-taking culture, you know what I mean? Where we don't want to be seen to be trying in a way.
So. I think part of it comes from the fact that, you know, especially for me, I know a lot of my surfing is held back because I live about an hour away from North Coast and South Coast. So now I'm in quite a unique position. I don't have to, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a local anywhere, but I like, you know, the places that I go, I only go when the forecast is decent. I'm not one of these guys that'll go in when it's like 3 foot onshore slop. Yeah, I've done that. You could call me a snob if you want, but there you go. Yeah. But one of my things is that sometimes when I go, and I've spoke to a few pros about this as well, is that sometimes I don't do things or push as hard because I know that it's going to be a wasted wave. Now, when you're talking about pros and people that are doing these things, maybe that's in the back of their head as well, when maybe they think this is like a perfect wave that I'm on. I don't want to like go too hard because if I fuck it up, I've got to go and sit in a lineup with people that are equally as good as I am or better. And, you know, I mean, I've been at North Devon reefs before, and I've been, you know, caught something, fucked it up, and then had to sit and wait for another 15, 20 minutes for a wave to come through because everybody else in front of me is waiting in the queue, and you kind of don't want to waste that. So I don't know, maybe that's part of it, or maybe that's just me. I don't know.
No, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And don't get me wrong, it was interesting when I was filming James, who I mentioned just now, actually that time, because of the angle and because of where I was shooting from it, for some reason that day it really jumped out at me. I remembered how quickly everything happens when you're trying to surf. You know, I remembered my own experiences of trying to pop up and then trying to make sense of, and the fact that everything is happening at 1,000 miles an hour. And it's very easy as a filmer to be standing there thinking, you know, the wave's doing this, you know, it's predictable. But it really took me back to my own experience of trying to surf, and the speed with which everything happens really does affect what I think people. And I also think, you know, I suppose a lot of the surfing here with the local break is focused on, it can be focused on the barrel a lot of the time, and it can be short, punchy rides, one maybe two maneuvers at most sometimes. So people are very focused on achieving one thing. So I almost feel like surfers here, they don't get me wrong, there is access to other waves that let you do it, but it's having that opportunity to try and learn how to go top to bottom on waves, isn't it? Whereas if you're at a punchy hollow beach break, sometimes you're not having the opportunity to develop that that skill set. But generally speaking, I should just keep my mouth shut, or someone should just say, "Let's see you have a go," because that'd just be an exercise in humility. I mean, surfing is a hard sport to learn, but don't get me wrong, it's joyful, really terrific sport to learn. Great, you know. I was swimming at Saunton the other day with the camera, and there weren't amazing conditions, but there was just this little window where the waves got really nice. There's this guy on a foamy, on like a proper I'd say a 4 foot wave. So you're in the water, it feels like it's 6, like looks like a pretty nice wave. He's right at the peak. He's on this foamy, but he's really he's a capable surfer. You can see that he's just absolutely flying down the line, and it just took me back. It really was like that experience of God. It is really beautiful to be in the water sometimes. The sights you actually see in the water are, that, you know, they are pretty special. So so I suppose it's a good lesson to remember that it is really about just the experience of being in the water more than anything else, you know, rather than who's the best in the world at it. But
Mate, and on that note, I think we've been going an hour, so yeah, it's flown by.
Yeah.
Just a little finisher. So you know, what gear are you using at the moment, and what are you working on?
So I shoot stills on a mirrorless Nikon camera. It's a Nikon Z7. Amazing stills camera, not incredible autofocus, but really terrific stills camera. But most of the time when I'm filming video, I film on a camera called the Panasonic GH5. And one of the reasons why I chose that camera is it's to do with, just to be technical, it's to do with the size of the sensor. So I've got like a 600mm lens, but if I put it on a GH5, it turns it into a 1200mm lens. So that allows me to get to achieve like really good focus of surfers who are often quite a long way away. So it allows me to fill the frame a bit more. And then, I mean, the real challenge with the GH5 is more when you're wanting to achieve like really wide shots. But yeah, I mean, it's quite an old camera now. I think it was like, came out in 2017, but the advantage of that is you can pick them up quite cheap secondhand. And yeah, I've been really happy with it. I'm still learning how to use it, but yeah, it's a great camera.
Awesome, mate.
Yeah,
I appreciate your time talking to me, and yeah, some really great insights into the world of surf photography, which you know, it can be kind of like one of those things that is quite a hidden art form. You know, to get people into surfing magazines and into surfing edits, you've got the guy that's actually behind the camera. So, you know, thanks for that, and yeah, I appreciate your time.
I really appreciate the invite, and apologies if I was a bit all over the place, but it was a pleasure to talk to you, Adz.
Awesome, mate. Thank you.
All right, cheers.